What's going on, guys? Don Marino here, and this year, beginning of the brand new year, 2020, I wanted to start a new series on the channel, and it's gonna be tech news. I want to do one of these about every week. I'm shooting for Thursday or Friday. I haven't quite decided yet, but this is gonna be week one of the year, January, week one. Let's get started. So with this, it's just me covering anything tech, anything interesting that I find in the news or that I think is interesting, and new things that are coming out in tech, whether that's the new consoles coming up, anything in phone technology, anything with that Tesla's doing or electric cars, anything tech oriented. That'll be the focus of this series. So the first story I wanted to talk about that I found interesting was that there was just a law passed for the Robo Calls that have been happening. Especially, I believe, if you live in the U.S., you know that the Robo Calls have been out of control lately. There's been this huge surge of them in 2019. It was up like 40% over the year. So the new act that just got signed in is called the Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence Act. It's a mouthful, but basically what it is the law got signed where the fine for robocalls and for companies not trying to stop robocalls has been bumped up to 10,000. I thought this was an interesting one, something small to start it off with. The biggest thing that interests me about this is why now. I feel like the robocall thing is dying out. And I feel like less people are getting tricked by it because it's becoming such a well-known thing. People aren't falling into it because everyone knows about it now. Everyone knows that last year there was this huge problem with robocalls, and even companies like AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, they caught on, and they even started sending out these scam alerts where if they were calling you, it would pop up on your thing saying scam alert, or it would say something along those lines. So I think this is interesting that it's coming out now. I think it's a little bit late. I think it's past the curve. The biggest thing I found interesting with the robocalls is that the people who get tricked the most are not the old people that you would think are getting tricked. It's actually younger people, from the ages 18 to 25. They are the biggest demographic on people who are getting scammed into these robocalls. So the next story is an interesting one. It was a company that was huge in 2019 and even grew. It was big in 2018, grew huge in 2019, and now 2020 is going to be a tough year, and that's Huawei. Huawei hit the market and they were huge. Their phones were a big deal. They were looking at being the next giant. For the first quarter last year, Samsung and Apple were not 1 and 2. Huawei was in the mix, and that was interesting for a couple reasons. One, the Huawei phone's price tag was comparable. It was something that was going to compete with them. It was going to bring a lot of competition. In 2019, Huawei sold 240 million smartphones. That's a 17% jump from 2018. However, they are not looking at that jump again because right now they are on the Washington trade blacklist. American companies are not allowed to work with Huawei because of the problems that's going on with the Chinese trade bloc, and also that they are seen as a company that's not trustworthy. That's why Huawei's looking at a tough year this next year. One of their bigger markets, the US, is not going to be a market for them. And also with that, they're not able to use Google. They're not able to use Google's Google Play Store. They're not able to use Google's anything because that is an American company. So they're looking and scrambling to make their own operating system, to make something separate from Google, to make their own app store. So it's going to be a slow year for Huawei, and I think that's an interesting one. And I think it's kind of disappointing on the aspect of smartphone development because Huawei was a big competitor, and it was going to shake things up, and it was going to force Apple and Samsung to step their game up if they wanted to compete. So moving over to something else that I found interesting was Sonos was recently in the news for their whole recycling program that they just came out with. Basically, to outline the recycling program, it was an opportunity for people with older Sonos products to recycle them and get up to 30% off something new. And this was a good idea for someone who wants to upgrade to the newer products that they have out. However, the problem with this is once the speakers got put into recycling mode, they were essentially bricked. They couldn't work anymore. There was no possible way to get them to work. They were useless. The only thing they could be sold for is the speakers inside of them and maybe some of the hardware. These are speakers that are very high quality and can be sold for $200 to $250 on the used market. So this was a big problem, and it kind of hurt the whole recycling program that they were trying to do. And it didn't make sense for consumers to, one, break their systems to get 30% off when they could gift this to someone else and have it still work, give it to a friend or give it to someone, sell it online and say, look, I recycled it, I sold it to someone else, give me my 30% off, versus them just breaking the product and making it completely useless. I think it is a better idea just to sell the speaker. It's a $200 to $250 speaker, so you might as well just sell it to someone else and then go ahead and upgrade and buy the new one. So Apple recently is starting to crack down. I don't think it's a good idea for them. I think they'll lose a market because there's a certain market that the only reason they even still might buy an Apple product or an Apple phone is because they have that option to jailbreak. And without that option, they might not even go and buy the product. I understand where Apple's coming from, where people are getting maybe apps for free from the App Store, or they're doing things with the phone that they might not like. And maybe Apple can find a workaround for that. However, the customization that people like that comes with jailbreaking, when that's taken away, some people might not want the phones anymore. I can see where people are still jailbreaking their phones to get newer things and also to torrent things and get free apps and free movies, and I can see the appeal, and I could also see why Apple wants to crack down. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's going to backfire because of the fact that there's a group of people that still only buy the phones because they're able to be jailbroken and they like that whole system. What do you guys think? Do you still jailbreak your iPhone in 2020 now? I know I haven't. I haven't jailbroken one since my iPod Touch that I owned probably 8 years ago. So I haven't seen a need for it. So the last thing I wanted to cover this week was a few things that are rumored for the NextGen consoles. A couple of the specs have been leaked, so I wanted to go over those real quick and what the specs were and what they were talking about. One thing I found interesting that was being reported was that the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X was that the PlayStation was going to be the cheaper, less powerful system, while the Xbox was going to be the more powerful, more expensive system. And I found that interesting, and I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the case is going to be that the PlayStation will be just as powerful as the Xbox. However, there's going to be different versions. Just like we see today, we have the Xbox or the PlayStation Slim, we have the regular PlayStation, we have the Pro. There's different versions of it. We also have the Xbox, the One X, the more powerful one, and the Xbox One S. And I think it's going to be the same thing. I think there's going to be this lineup from low end to high end. So currently, they're talking about the PlayStation releasing at the $500 mark, and I think that's accurate. I do think that Xbox, and the difference between Xbox and PlayStation in the beginning will be that Sony is not going to release a super powerful system off the bat. And I have a feeling that Xbox won't either. Now, they were talking about 8K, 30 frames. They were talking about 4K up to 120. And I think that will happen, but I have a theory that it's not going to be out of the gate, and that there is going to be a cheaper option that will allow you a lower price mark. Because with the specs they're talking about with the Xbox, you're looking at a $700, maybe $600 system, probably close to that $700 range, and that's quite expensive. But what they're talking about with the CPU, they're talking about a 8-core AMD 3rd gen processor, which I see most likely that being the case. Of course, the SSD, most likely M.2, at least a terabyte. The PlayStation has to have minimum of a terabyte. They're talking about full backwards compatibility, which I think is a must in this next gen of consoles, because It's been missing. It was missing from the PlayStation 4. We kind of had it in the PS3. It's just been this. There needs to be backwards compatibility all the way down to the PlayStation 1. Whether that is I can throw in my PS1 disc and it works, or I can go and download the game or use some kind of monthly subscription where I get all the old games for $10 a month. And they're also talking about 8K TV support. So that's the newest news we know about the PlayStation 5, and obviously we already got Microsoft's announcement of the Xbox. So it'll be interesting to see. I think we'll get more information very soon within the next month. There will be a lot of information coming out on the PlayStation 5. I think that Sony needs to do their conference soon. I'm interested to see when they will do it. But of course, I will be there to let you guys know all the new tech news. So bear with me, just getting this started. This is something I'm really interested in doing every week, coming out with what I find interesting in tech, talking about it a little bit, just discussing what I think is interesting, what I think is going to be something big upcoming in the next week, or that was in the past week. Like I said, I want to do weekly videos on this. I want it to be, kind of updating things very quickly and, talking about things that might be looked at in the future that are coming out, or stuff like with the NextGen Consoles. Look out for folding phones. We got the Cybertruck news coming out on that. Just different things that in tech that I think are interesting that I do want to talk about and share with you guys. So if you guys want to stay up to date on everything, go down there, subscribe, throw a like on the video, leave me a comment or something that you found interesting in the past week. And until I got something else for you guys, thanks for watching.